Good evening, traveler. Wherever you are, I hope you found a soft place to rest tonight. The lights are low, the world outside is quiet, and it's time to drift far, far away to a time before time itself. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Loosen your shoulders. Let the day fade behind you like the last glow of sunset. If you can, lie back and let your head sink gently into the pillow. Pull your blanket close. The only thing you need to do now is breathe. Slow, calm, and easy. Tonight we're going on a journey through the oldest story on Earth. Long before trees, before animals, before even the concept of breathing, our planet was young and dreaming. We'll travel together through the oceans of the past, where the first sparks of life began to shimmer beneath the waves. It's a story of patience, of silence, of infinite possibility, told softly enough to guide you into sleep. If you haven't already, make sure your lights are off, your phone is quiet, and your room feels safe and calm. And if you'd like to join me for more journeys like this, stories of science, wonder, and dreams, don't forget to subscribe and help this little corner of calm continue to grow. Your support keeps these stories alive, like a flame gently glowing in the dark. Now, take one last deep breath, in through the nose and out through the mouth. The journey is about to begin. Close your eyes. We're going back to the beginning of everything. Before there was life, there was only silence. The world was a newborn, spinning slowly through the darkness of space, still wrapped in the fiery breath of its own creation. The earth glowed faintly, a sphere of molten rock and restless energy. Volcanoes rose and fell, like the pulse of a living creature. Rivers of lava poured endlessly into oceans of vapor. The air was thick with storm and smoke, a haze of methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide that cloaked the planet from the light of the stars. Comets and asteroids rained upon the surface, each impact reshaping continents before they ever truly existed. Yet every collision carried something precious: water, carbon, organic dust, the ingredients of what would someday breathe. Over eons, the surface began to cool. The roaring heat softened to a slow simmer, and the crust hardened, cracking like cooling glass. Steam hissed upward from the first fissures. Clouds gathered, and the sky grew heavy. Then came the rain, not for hours or days, but for millions of years. It fell endlessly, hissing against rock, boiling, evaporating, and falling again, until rivers filled the lowlands and the first oceans shimmered under a red sun. The earth had found her calm, and in that calm, the stage for life was set. The seas that formed upon the young earth were unlike any waters we know. They were heavy with minerals, restless with heat, and charged with energy. Beneath the thick, dim sky, they stretched endlessly, vast mirrors reflecting the copper glow of the newborn sun. In these waters, chemistry began to dream. Hydrogen and oxygen danced with carbon, nitrogen and sulfur, stirred by the rhythm of the tides. The moon, much closer than it is today, pulled these tides with strength enough to lift whole oceans. In that constant motion, molecules met and mingled. Every wave was a possibility. Volcanic vents bubbled in the deep, releasing clouds of iron and phosphorus into the water. Lightning flashed across the surface, splitting molecules apart and forcing them together again. From that chaos came new arrangements, fragile, unstable, but different. Molecules that could hold energy, that could react, that could change. The earth, once a realm of fire and stone, had become water and sky, a cradle for creation. Every ripple, every drop, was part of an ancient experiment that would, in time, learn to breathe. Somewhere in the shallow edges of the ancient ocean, under the warmth of a dim sun, pools formed in the cracks of cooling rock. They were small, quiet sanctuaries where the planet's energy gathered. Inside them, carbon-based molecules drifted and collided. They joined and broke apart, endlessly repeating their dance of chance. The lightning above and the heat below provided energy. The minerals in the water offered structure. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, certain molecules began to form patterns. They folded, twisted, and connected in ways that allowed them to copy themselves. They weren't alive, not yet, but they remembered, in a way that matter never had before. One day, perhaps in one of those pools, a chain of molecules found itself enclosed within a thin film. A bubble formed from lipids, born of the sea's chemistry. Inside that delicate shell, order held, energy flowed. Change could happen, safely and slowly. It was the world's first attempt at a boundary, the earliest sketch of a cell. The line between chemistry and biology had been crossed. The ocean had begun to think. No one was there to see the moment it happened, the instant when matter became self-aware enough to replicate. Yet somewhere, in the quiet corners of the ocean, the first true cell appeared. It was small, fragile, and solitary, but it carried within it the blueprint of everything to come. Inside this microscopic world, molecules began to work together. They absorbed energy from the environment, stored it, and used it to build new parts of themselves. They grew, divided, and changed. Each division brought imperfection, and each imperfection brought evolution. Somewhere in those endless cycles, life began to speak the language of persistence. The seas filled with invisible colonies, drifting gently in the current, multiplying quietly under the dim sun. The planet, once a world of silence and stone, now held something new, a pulse. From this point onward, Earth was no longer alone in the universe. She had company, small and unseen, but vibrant and alive. For more than 1 billion years, life remained microscopic. The oceans shimmered with activity. Yet to the naked eye, the planet still seemed empty. No forests, no creatures, no sound, only the quiet hum of single cells dividing in the dark. These early organisms lived patiently. They fed on minerals and sunlight, adapted to volcanic heat and frozen depths, and learned to survive in every corner of the sea. Slowly, they began to form thin mats across rocks and vents, faint traces of green and brown that caught the light. These were the first communities, simple but united, the beginnings of ecosystems. Above them, storms still crossed the sky, continents drifted, and mountains rose and fell. Time itself became a slow tide. The planet was learning stability, and life was learning endurance. It would take another 1 billion years for these quiet forms to change the world. But for now, the ocean slept, calm, alive, and dreaming. The universe, for the first time, could rest alongside something that lived. In the endless hush of the primordial ocean, life learned to endure. The earliest cells, simple and self-contained, floated through the warm shallows. They were small beyond imagining, invisible motes of motion, living chemistry wrapped in thin membranes. Yet within them, something new had taken root: intention. Each cell gathered energy from its surroundings, absorbing heat, minerals, and light, turning raw matter into order. Some clung to the cracks of volcanic rock, where the water was rich with nutrients. Others drifted freely, catching soft rays from the distant sun. Their lives were cycles of division and renewal, repetition and change. They had no sight, no thought, no sound, and still, they were restless. Within their tiny worlds, they carried the first memories of survival, written not in words, but in sequences of molecules. Those codes would become the whispers of evolution, passed from one generation to the next, endlessly refined by time. In that invisible realm, the oceans began to breathe, every cell a heartbeat, every tide a pulse. The planet was alive in earnest now, though she still slept beneath her own sky. It happened slowly, a change so subtle that even the sea itself didn't notice. Some of these ancient cells learned a trick that would transform the universe. They began to capture light. At first, it was simple, a reaction between pigment and sunlight. energy stored in fragile chemical bonds. But over millions of years, this became something profound: photosynthesis. These new cells, the ancestors of cyanobacteria, wove sunlight into sugar and released oxygen as a byproduct. The ocean shimmered with their work, each microscopic life form a tiny alchemist, turning light into life. The seas grew greener as these organisms spread. They formed thin mats on shallow rocks, glowing softly in the daylight. With every ray of sun absorbed, with every breath of oxygen released, the world's chemistry began to shift. The air that once suffocated with carbon and methane began to change, slowly, invisibly, towards something breathable. The planet didn't yet know it, but these quiet beings were its first engineers. Their patience would reshape the sky. The cyanobacteria were tiny beyond sight, but their ambition was vast. They carpeted coastlines, covered stones, and gathered in great floating colonies across the surface of the sea. Their colors, blue, green, and gold, painted the young planet in shimmering patterns. Day after day, they harvested light. The process was tireless and serene, but the byproduct, oxygen, began to accumulate, slowly, imperceptibly. This invisible gas changed everything it touched. It rusted iron in the oceans, staining the seabed red. It reacted with gases in the sky, thinning the old toxic haze. The world was being cleansed, molecule by molecule, by the breath of microbes. For millions of years, the cyanobacteria continued their silent labor. They asked for nothing. They built no structures. They simply lived, and in living, they transformed. In the stillness of deep time, the ocean had become a vast, invisible factory of air. At last, the change became impossible to ignore. Oxygen, once a rare trace, had become abundant. The balance tipped. What had been a gift for some was poison for others. The early anaerobic life, those that thrived without oxygen, began to die. Entire lineages vanished, undone by the new world they had never imagined. It was Earth's first mass extinction, and yet it was also her first great awakening. With oxygen came energy, enormous, untapped potential. Chemical reactions that had once been weak now burst into life. New forms of metabolism arose, allowing cells to grow, move, and interact in ways never before possible. The planet, for the first time, began to hum with vitality. Above the seas, the sky turned a deeper blue as ozone formed, shielding the surface from harsh ultraviolet light. The Earth had remade her own atmosphere, and all of it, every breath of air, every gust of wind, could be traced back to the patient work of microbes in the sea. But creation always brings destruction. For every cell that thrived in this new oxygen-rich world, another perished. Oxygen, though vital to the future, was deadly to the past. The seas turned toxic to those who could not adapt, and the once thriving anaerobic world faded into obscurity. Yet extinction is a strange kind of progress. In loss, new spaces open. In silence, new voices can emerge. Some cells evolved defenses, enzymes that tamed oxygen's fire, that used it instead of fearing it. These survivors inherited the Earth. They were the architects of the next chapter of life. And so, in the quiet aftermath of catastrophe, a deeper resilience was born. The ocean still shimmered, now under a gentler, bluer sky. If you could float there, among the waves of that ancient sea, you would feel the pulse of a living planet beneath you. Slow, patient, eternal. Life had learned to breathe. In the long silence that followed the oxygenation, the oceans shimmered with possibility. Countless tiny forms drifted through the water, some struggling, others adapting, all shaped by the invisible hand of time. Within this vast microscopic realm, a new idea was beginning to unfold: cooperation. Certain cells, once solitary, began to live side by side. They shared warmth, exchanged nutrients, and protected one another from the changing tides of chemistry. It was a small step, almost accidental, but it held infinite promise. When one cell provided what another lacked, both thrived. These early partnerships changed everything. The ocean, once a competitive expanse of isolated lives, became a web of mutual benefit. Over millions of years, some of these collaborations deepened, merging entirely, one cell living inside another, each providing what the other could not. This quiet act of union would become the foundation of all complex life to come. From the darkness of the deep, harmony was born, not through strength or dominance, but through sharing. The planet's most important lesson had arrived: survival through connection. The first eukaryotic cells were miracles of partnership. Inside their walls lived entire worlds, tiny powerhouses that had once been independent bacteria, now transformed into mitochondria. They burned oxygen efficiently, feeding energy to their hosts, who in turn gave them shelter and stability. This merger marked a turning point in the history of existence. For the first time, cells had compartments, organelles with specialized roles, membranes within membranes, order within chaos. Energy flowed with purpose. Information could be stored, copied, and protected more precisely than ever before. The world became richer, more dynamic, shapes diversified, structures emerged. Eukaryotic life spread slowly but steadily, a tide of complexity rising from the ancient seafloor. With every replication, the pattern of life became more intricate, more resilient, more capable of dreaming new forms. And all of it began with trust, one cell inviting another to live within it, to become something greater together than they could ever be apart. Deep inside these new eukaryotic cells, something astonishing evolved. A center of command, the nucleus, a sealed chamber of genetic memory, became the quiet voice guiding the cell's behavior. Here, DNA was no longer left adrift in open water. It was guarded, curated, spoken to softly by the molecular messengers that carried its instructions outward. This was the dawn of control, the beginning of organized communication within life. Each strand of DNA, a story; each protein a word; each cell a sentence written by time. Together, they composed the first biological language, not of sound, but of structure. With this new precision came creativity. Cells could now build in patterns, repair themselves, adapt with foresight. The sea, once a place of chemical chaos, had begun to speak in symmetry. The language of the nucleus would echo through all that followed, in coral and tree, fish and bird, and eventually, in the breath of those who now listen in the dark, tracing this story back to its beginning. For eons, life had been a solitary act of copying, one cell dividing into two, endlessly repeating the same blueprint. But nature, as always, sought variation. Somewhere in the depths, cells discovered the power of exchange. They began to trade pieces of their genetic code, to blend, rather than clone. It was clumsy at first, an experiment in imperfection, but it was revolutionary. Recombination gave life a new rhythm, the rhythm of diversity. Now, change could happen faster. New traits appeared, new solutions to survival. The world became a grand experiment in adaptation, every organism carrying not just its own history, but fragments of another's. Sex was not romance, not yet. It was resilience, a quiet cooperation that made life unpredictable and therefore unstoppable. The universe had found a way to keep its story forever fresh. Even with these miracles unfolding, the earth remained still for a very long time. Life had learned to breathe, to cooperate, to innovate, yet all of it remained hidden beneath the waves, small and unseen. For nearly 1 billion years, the planet existed in this steady rhythm. Continents drifted, volcanoes rose and fell, ice ages came and went. Through it all, life prepared itself, refining its inner machinery, perfecting its languages, waiting for a moment when the world above would be ready to receive it. In that waiting, beauty grew. Algae painted the seas green. Microbial mats spread like lace across the ocean floor. The surface of the planet shimmered under sunlight, alive with potential too small for the eye, but too vast for imagination. It was as though the earth were taking a long breath before speaking again. The next words she would utter would fill the oceans with creatures of impossible shape and color, the first true bodies of the living world. The sea, once filled only with drifting single cells, began to shimmer with a new kind of pattern. Small groups of organisms started to remain linked after division, tiny chains, clusters and spheres of living matter. At first, it was accidental. One cell simply forgot to let go of the other. But what began as a mistake became a revolution. Together, they were stronger. In these small colonies, some cells began to take on different roles. A few absorbed sunlight, others anchored to surfaces or helped with movement. Within the quiet rhythm of the tides, cooperation became structure, and structure became form. This was the first whisper of multicellularity, an idea so simple, yet so profound, that it would change the face of the planet. Each connection was fragile, held by chemistry and trust. Yet from these delicate bonds grew the foundation of every body that would ever swim, crawl, walk, or breathe. The oceans, once filled with solitude, were now weaving communities. Over time, these colonies learned new ways to organize themselves. Some grew larger, forming sheets and filaments that rippled in the currents. Others began to shape hollow spheres, the earliest semblances of tissues. Within them, cells communicated through chemical whispers, sending signals that guided who would grow, who would move, who would feed. Specialization had begun, and with it, the miracle of form. In the shallows, sunlight filtered through clear water, casting golden patterns over these delicate structures. They swayed gently with the tide, neither plant nor animal yet, but something in between. Experiments of evolution, prototypes of future creatures, though they lacked eyes or brains. They were the first architects of complexity. Each movement, each division, was an act of design without designer, a collaboration written by time itself. The earth was changing again. Oxygen levels rose, and the oceans grew rich with nutrients. Ice sheets melted, releasing minerals into the water. The stage was being set for something extraordinary, an explosion of creativity, unlike anything before. In this fertile environment, multicellular life began to flourish. Organisms developed new shapes, new strategies. Some floated freely, feeding on sunlight. Others grazed across microbial mats or burrowed into soft sediment. Slowly, the seas began to move with purpose, the first stirrings of an ecosystem. Beneath the surface, evolution was gathering momentum, layering possibilities upon possibilities. The world waited, silent but expectant, for the moment when this quiet experiment would burst into color and motion. The deep time of preparation was nearly over. The age of visible life was about to begin. The transition from stillness to abundance was not sudden, though in the grand scale of Earth's history, it seemed like a flash. Shifts in the planet's chemistry, temperature, and oxygen allowed life to accelerate. Cells communicated more efficiently, bodies became stronger, and reproduction grew more intricate. Perhaps it was a change in the Earth's orbit, a surge in minerals, or the evolution of new genetic tools. No one knows for certain, but something tipped the balance. Life, once content to drift in microscopic anonymity, began to expand in both form and ambition. Predation appeared, one organism consuming another. It was both terrifying and creative. The arms race of survival began, fueling diversity at an unimaginable pace. Eyes began to form, muscles took shape, skeletons hardened. The ocean, once soft and quiet, filled with movement and intention. The spark that had begun in chemistry had become biology, and now, artistry. By the time the Cambrian dawned, Earth had transformed. The seas teemed with possibilities. For the first time, creatures could see, move, and hunt. The ocean floor, once a desert, became a jungle of motion. Sponges filtered water through intricate chambers. Worm-like forms traced soft trails in the sediment. Small shelled creatures crawled across the seabed, their patterns delicate as lace. The world was awakening to form and function, to beauty and peril alike. It was as if the planet had been sleeping for billions of years and had suddenly opened its eyes. The Cambrian would become a symphony of evolution, a crescendo of diversity that would echo through every living thing to come. And as the waves rolled endlessly under that ancient sun, the earth whispered the same promise she carries still, that life once begun will never stop dreaming. The seas of earth were no longer quiet. The once still waters, where life had swam gently for billions of years, were now filled with an astonishing burst of creativity. The Cambrian period had arrived, and with it came an explosion of forms, creatures of all shapes, sizes, and abilities, each one designed for a purpose, each one a masterpiece of evolution's patient hand. For the first time, the oceans were filled with color and movement. Soft-bodied organisms floated lazily beneath the surface, their translucent bodies glowing as sunlight filtered down through shallow water. Others crawled across the seafloor, their shells hard and ridged, shimmering in the dim light. Fins, limbs, and spines appeared. Eyes opened, sensation and motion came together, and the living world began to perceive itself. The ocean was a vast, silent stage for the first great act of visible life. Every ripple carried a new idea. Every wave was a brushstroke on the canvas of existence. What had begun as molecules in ancient pools had now become an endless choreography of form and function. Life had discovered movement, and with it, freedom. The Cambrian seas glowed with activity. For the first time, predators hunted prey, and prey learned to hide, to burrow, to blend with their surroundings. The ocean floor became alive with shadows, a ballet of pursuit and escape. Out of this tension came beauty, armor polished by necessity, patterns shaped by survival, colors that mirrored light to confuse the hunter. The trilobites wandered across the seabed, their bodies jointed and strong, their eyes made of crystal lenses that captured every shimmer of motion. Worm-like creatures tunneled through the soft sediment, leaving behind delicate trails that traced their invisible journeys. In the open water, jelly-like beings pulsed softly, their slow movement both aimless and eternal. Every creature in the Cambrian Ocean carried within it the memory of its ancestors and the promise of what was to come. The sea had become a mirror of imagination, a world dreaming itself awake. As life multiplied, the structure of the world changed. Coral-like colonies grew across the seabed, building the first reefs, vast, living fortresses that turned motion into stability. These structures shaped the ocean currents, provided shelter, and created the foundations for ecosystems that would endure for hundreds of millions of years. The chemistry of the planet shifted once again. Oxygen levels continued to rise, feeding the fire of evolution. With every breath released by plants and bacteria, the atmosphere thickened, and the oceans grew richer with nutrients. Sunlight reached further into the depths, and with it came more life. The planet, for the first time, was no longer merely habitable. It was alive in its entirety, and in that aliveness, new senses emerged. Creatures began to feel vibration, pressure, heat, and sound. The world was learning awareness, not thought, not consciousness as we know it, but the first flicker of recognition that existence could be experienced. The Cambrian Age was not peaceful, but it was purposeful. The great burst of diversity came at a cost. Many species vanished as quickly as they appeared, unable to adapt to the new rules of competition and change. Yet every extinction opened space for something new, something more refined. Evolution was a sculptor, carving the world not with haste, but with patience. For the first time, food chains formed, loops of energy, moving from light to plant to animal, and back again. The web of life became more intricate, more fragile, and more beautiful. Each creature's survival depended on another's, a quiet balance that mirrored the chemistry of the very first cells. And above it all, the tides continued their endless rhythm. The moon still pulled at the water, shaping the cycles of birth and decay. The earth, breathing in oxygen and breathing out time, watched her oceans shimmer with the glow of endless renewal. As the Cambrian seas reached their peak of diversity, something remarkable began to stir at the edges of the world. Certain creatures lingered near the coasts, resting in the shallows as the tides withdrew. Their bodies, shaped by water, began to encounter air. Muscles strained against gravity, gills flickered, seeking moisture. For brief moments, life touched the unknown and retreated again. But with each generation, it lingered longer. The first plants clung to damp stone, drinking sunlight directly from the open sky. Algae thickened into moss, creating the first green traces on barren rock. The Earth's surface, once silent and sterile, began to change color. The Cambrian dream was reaching its close, but its echoes would last forever. The ocean, which had nurtured all that lived, was preparing to share its creation with the land. The waves would still sing, but soon their song would be answered from above, by footsteps, by breath, by the first hearts that beat beneath the open air. The ocean had been life's only home for billions of years. Every heartbeat, every movement, every spark of existence had unfolded beneath its blue surface. Yet even as the seas thrived, something in the rhythm of life began to shift. The tides had become familiar, the patterns of the deep were known, and so quietly, the first restless steps toward another world began. Along the shorelines, where waves stretched and withdrew, small creatures began to linger. They clung to wet rocks, hiding in tide pools left behind by retreating water. These pools were worlds unto themselves, small laboratories of change. With every cycle of tide and time, creatures that survived the brief exposure to air learned endurance. Gills adapted to capture oxygen from the atmosphere. Limbs, once meant only for swimming, grew stronger, capable of pushing against soft sand. What began as chance became intention. The world above was strange and harsh. Gravity pressed heavily on bodies used to buoyancy. The sunlight, unfiltered by water, burned against fragile skin. Yet it was also filled with possibilities, warmth, stillness, and an endless horizon. Life began to explore these edges with patience, feeling its way across the border between sea and sky. Plants had arrived first. They crept from shallow waters onto damp earth, spreading slowly but persistently. Mosses and algae clung to rocks, holding moisture in soil, breathing out oxygen into the air. The land, once bare and silent, began to change. Tiny forests of green began to form, and for the first time, the planet smelled of life above the tide. These plants became the foundation for everything that would follow. They anchored soil, softened the impact of storms, and created the first habitats for small creatures that dared to leave the water. They called silently to the oceans, offering food, shelter, and a new beginning. Every gust of wind that swept across those ancient landscapes carried the same invitation: come and see. The first true travelers from sea to shore were not the conquerors of land, but the cautious wanderers. Some were fish-like beings with strong fins, able to push themselves along the mudflats. They would rest there, their bodies half submerged, breathing in the open air before slipping back beneath the surface. Over time, their descendants would linger longer, their limbs reshaping into tools for walking, their scales thickening against the drying wind. The move was slow, almost imperceptible, but it was steady. Evolution does not hurry. It waits for moments of opportunity. a shift in tide, a new source of food, a safer nesting place. And then it takes one step forward. The line between water and land became porous, blurred by the persistence of those who refused to turn back. In this border world, life found its courage. The first breath of air drawn above the waves was both terrifying and miraculous. It marked the beginning of something the planet had never seen before, a world that lived in two realms at once. The land itself was not yet ready to receive them. Volcanoes still smoldered across the continents. Rain fell constantly, carving rivers through the new soil. Thunder echoed across empty plains. Yet within that chaos, stability was growing. The Earth's crust had settled, the air had cleared, and the sky had turned a steady blue. The creatures that ventured ashore did not know they were shaping the future. They were simply following instinct, the pull of hunger, the need for safety, the curiosity to explore. But in doing so, they rewrote the rules of existence. No longer bound by the tides, life could now move freely across two worlds. The first footprints pressed into the soft earth near the water's edge were fragile and fleeting, soon washed away by waves. Yet they were the most important marks ever made. The memory of water carried onto land, the signature of possibility. As ages passed, the boundaries between sea and land dissolved. Plants rose taller, spreading leaves that caught the sun like sails. Insects followed, small and delicate, their wings stirring the air above ancient ferns. Amphibians emerged from the swamps, their bodies sleek and strong, breathing through both skin and lungs. The planet had changed once more. The song of the ocean was now joined by new sounds: the soft brush of wind through leaves, the murmur of streams, the first quiet calls of creatures beneath the open sky. The great migration from water to land was not a single moment, but a continuous flow. Each generation carried the memory of the sea within it, in salt-filled blood, in the curve of a spine, in the rhythm of a heartbeat that still echoed the waves. The earth, now green and breathing, held her breath for what would come next. Life had climbed from the deep, learned to walk, and found a new horizon. And though the ocean still called softly behind, the journey forward had already begun. The world had changed beyond recognition. The seas that once held every secret of life now watched quietly as their children walked beneath open skies. Forests spread across continents, rivers carved the earth, and the air shimmered with oxygen, a breath born long ago in the ocean's heart. The story that began in darkness and water had reached the sunlight at last. Yet even as life filled the land, the sea remained its keeper. Every living thing still carried within it the memory of salt water. In its blood, in its chemistry, in the rhythm of its pulse, the connection between ocean and creature was never broken. It was only transformed. The waves still called softly to those who had left, a reminder that everything which lives and moves once drifted in the deep. At the edges of the continents, where the surf whispered against rock, the boundary between past and present blurred. The ocean was not gone. It simply continued its quiet work, shaping coastlines, feeding rain, holding the memory of beginnings within its tides. Forests grew taller, their roots anchoring the earth that had once been bare. The planet's surface, which had known only heat and silence, now pulsed with the rhythms of season and song. Insects hummed beneath leaves, rivers glimmered through the undergrowth. Creatures wandered far from the sea, but never beyond its influence. Every breeze that passed through those early forests carried traces of the ocean: salt in the mist, moisture in the air, echoes of distant tides. The planet had learned to breathe as one vast organism, every system intertwined with the others. What had started as simple chemistry had become an intricate, self-sustaining network of life. Even in stillness, the earth was alive with motion, too slow to see. Roots crept through soil, mountains shifted, the moon pulled at the water, raising tides that brushed the land and retreated again. The memory of the sea was in everything. Time, as it always does, moved quietly forward. Eras came and went, bringing new forms, new extinctions, new awakenings. Dinosaurs would rise and vanish. Mammals would scurry and evolve. The planet would freeze and thaw, again and again. But the song of life continued without pause. Each age layered itself upon the last, like sediment building on the ocean floor. Beneath every mountain, within every fossil, the ancient ocean still whispered its lullaby. It spoke of beginnings, of first breaths and long silences, of how existence was born, not from noise or violence, but from patience. And even now, if one listens closely, that patience can still be heard in the movement of waves, in the wind that crosses the water, in the heartbeat that steadies as sleep begins to take hold. Life's journey, from molecules to minds, was never one of conquest. It was a long unfolding, a slow remembering. The same forces that had shaped the first cell still guide the smallest gestures today. The turn of a leaf toward the sun, the ripple of a fish beneath the surface, the quiet inhale before dreaming. We are the descendants of the ocean's imagination, carrying its legacy within us. Every heartbeat is a tide, every breath a wave. We have learned to walk upon land, to gaze at stars, to wonder where we came from, but the answer has never left us. It moves through our veins, it hums in our sleep, it waits in the hush before dawn. The story of early life is not one that ended. It is one that continues through every living thing that listens. So now, as you lie there in the dark, let the rhythm of the earth become your own. The tides still move, the air still breathes, and somewhere, beneath the quiet surface of thought, the same spark that awoke in the ancient sea still glows gently within you. Rest in that thought. Drift with it. The ocean has not forgotten you, and it never will.